All right. Thank you all so much for coming here today to join us as we try and envision the future academy or a future academy, alternative academies together. My name is Nicky Agate. I am one of the co-PIs on the HuMetricsHSS project. And in my everyday life, I am Associate Dean for Academic Engagement at Carnegie Mellon University. That's in Pittsburgh. For those of you that don't know, it occupies the ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee people, the Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. Many of them were driven here by colonizers, and I want to acknowledge and uplift their historic, unique, and enduring relationship with this land, and honor the people who have stewarded it through generations. As we enter the second day of our convocation together, I'm going to take a leaf from my colleague Chris Long's book and talk about a couple of values that are sort of dear to me right now. Those are gratitude, community, and care. One of our panelists, Carrie Smith, who's the Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Alberta, actually just 5 minutes ago let us know that she can't be with us because she's working hard this moment to ensure that decisions that are being made in a precarious encampment situation at her campus are being made with justice and equity at their core. So we're here talking about the enactment of values, not just the talking about values. And so those sort of gratitude, community, and care for me are coming together to sort of shape, I think, our conversation as it goes today. I am really, really excited to be moderating this conversation with these amazing panelists who are going to introduce themselves. I've asked them to do it in a maximum of 1 minute so that we have lots of time for conversation, and to tell us not only their name, role, and institution, but because we're going to be talking about how we might envisage a future academy, to give us one example of a memorable, rewarding experience that they've had in the current academy, something that we could use as a building block as we move forward. Katina, you're top of my screen. Do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thanks, Nikki, and thanks for having us. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I love HuMetrics work, and I think any chance we all have collectively to talk about the values that drive us is really welcome. So my name is Katina Rogers. I'm an independent scholar and the founder of a small consultancy called Inkcap. My PhD is in comparative literature, and I've worked on graduate education reform for the last 15 years or so at institutions like the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Scholarly Communication Institute, the MLA, and CUNY, City University of New York. And now I work with universities and nonprofits across the US and Canada to help them design and implement creative, sustainable, and equitable structures. So I do a lot of program evaluation, strategic planning, grant writing, and academic editing. Something that's been really memorable recently, and it's interesting, it's an interesting question for me because I'm so often an outsider in the kinds of spaces that I'm entering now. But I recently was part of a closing symposium for the University of Iowa's Humanities for the Public Good program, which was directed by Teresa Mangum. And it was such a delight to be there. The thing that really struck me, I mean, I knew going into it how powerful their programming had been, but the thing that struck me was how joyful everybody was to be there. It was so clear that years of relationship development had been happening. People were happy to see one another. They felt seen and heard and welcomed in the space where they were. And it felt so good. And it just reminded me that like these academic spaces can and should be nourishing. They don't have to be the drain that they so often are. So I think that moment will stick with me for a long time. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Katina. Lasana, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you all. And thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm looking forward to it. My name is Lasana Kazembe. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education, and I'm also an adjunct associate in Africana Studies. And as of this coming fall, I'll be the incoming department chair in our School of Education, something I'm not proud of, but it's got to be done. So But my work takes place in three areas, or three what I call constellations, and that is the world of education, the world of Africana history and culture, and the world of art and arts pedagogy. I'm a poet whose work for the last 35 years has taken place in schools, communities, juvenile detention centers, and prisons. So I do a lot of work around the arts in those various spaces. In terms of something, a joy moment, I guess, is actually a series of moments. And I taught this spring, I taught an advanced critical qualitative methods course in our urban education studies, our doctoral program. And one of the things that always gives me great joy, great elation is aha moments when people actually begin to get it, like when it clicks, especially knotty problems and sticky things that have been like just, gnawing at them. But I saw that several times this semester, and students breathing sighs of relief and big Moon Mullins eyes and things of that nature. So it was really great to see that. And I think also it represents progress for grad students who are often spouses and working people. So they need, to get some assurance, and they need to know that they're making progress. So that's always a great sign of joy for me.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of nodding going on here. I'll go to Kathy, who I think was nodding hardest.
Yes, my name, just really briefly, is Katherine D. Harris. I am the Director of Public Programming in the College of Humanities and Arts at San Jose State University. And SJSU is in the middle of Silicon Valley, which means that we're focusing on AI right now very quickly and looking for money for that. But I'm also part of the 23 campus consortium in California with the Cal State system. And as a digital humanist and a professor of literature and digital humanities, I take the values to everything that I do, from service to teaching to the major projects that I work on. And a few of those are the DH at CSU consortium, where we're trying to build a DH consortium across all 23 campuses, 30,000 faculty and staff. So just a small project. I'm also one of the key co-editors of the Digital Pedagogy in the Humanities, published by the MLA, and employing a diverse group of 700 people to put together how to use pedagogy in a digital way before we hit the pandemic. I'm also the director of a few internal grant initiatives, as well as any grants that we get in terms of community engagement. And I did spend the last 3 years as the chair of the College Retention, Tenure, and Promotion Committee. And what I find, just a small thing, is that the duck's feet paddling underwater of building capacity and creating infrastructure is not always acknowledged. But once we start talking about what are the values and the value statement of all these massive projects that I run, we start identifying and making visible what people are already doing. We just give it some language, especially through the HuMetrics paradigm. And so when I envision the future of higher ed and of our campuses as well, it's instilling that kind of values-based system into not just the research and scholarly activity, but also in the decisions we make about public programming. Do we need a mic? Is it accessible to everybody? Do we have wayfinding on campus, and what value does that do? And when I took the HuMetrics workshop in 2018, I discovered that the value of public good is what I've worked my entire career towards, and I was grateful to HuMetrics for helping me identify it, because then I've been able to govern my own career, not just my scholarship, based on this idea of public good. So thank you for having us here today.
You're so welcome. And Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Borchardt. I use she, her pronouns. I am the scholarly communication librarian at American University in Washington, D.C. My day-to-day job, I spend a lot of time focusing on open access scholarship and how we can make more of our scholarship openly available without paywall. And my research interests focus on research metrics and how we can use more diverse measures to measure research impact. And I think through that process, I've really started to focus more on equitable methods of rewarding, diverse forms of scholarship. And for my moment, I feel like I'm cheating a little bit, but I was fortunate enough to be part of the HuMetrics Fellowship Program. which brought together a lot of people to talk about, all the great work that they're doing and the kind of support that they need and the stumbling blocks. And, coming from my research metrics background, I used to think in terms of citation counts and bibliometrics and altmetrics and things like that, and realizing that I really was joining this larger framework of people who are all coming from different fields, different perspectives, different backgrounds, but that we're all working towards the same goals, and that we could do it in a way that was enlifting and empowering and respectful was really, really exciting. So I'm super excited to be here and continue that conversation today.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here. For those of you who are in the audience, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to our panelists and sort of have them discuss. But if you have things you want to add or there are things you'd like to follow up on, please just either write a comment in the chat, or if you want to unmic, let us know, and Penny will do that. Katina, I was going to go to you first of all, and I was wondering if you could help set the stage for us by talking about what, in your role as a consultant, you're seeing as broad patterns of a desire for change across academia. I'm hoping they exist. And then we'll open it up and see if others are seeing similar patterns.
Sure, I would love to. So my goal with Inkcap is always to enable partner institutions to create and foster high impact and publicly engaged scholarship. And so I've had chances to work on a lot of different kinds of projects, working on things like flexible dissertation standards and, like I said, program evaluation, changing exam protocols, and things like that. And so I've worked with lots of different partners on lots of different kinds of projects, and it feels to me like conversations are kind of happening on two totally different wavelengths. On one hand, it feels to me like the needle has absolutely moved in terms of underlying values. I started working in and around this area even while I was finishing up my PhD in like 2009 when I was working at the Sloan Foundation, and to see the transformation in like where the baseline norms are for what people expect and what they're hoping for is really notable. People have been working on this for decades. I think that work really shows, especially when I talk to students. Students are really eager to be doing creative work, socially engaged work. I think students have a craving to do work that matters to them and to their communities and where they can see a real impact in the world. And almost every faculty member and administrator that I talk to is also eager to support the students in that work. So that all seems really good. But then on the other hand, it feels like the structures haven't quite caught up. And so there's, I think, this great sense of desire. And I like that you framed it, Nicky, in terms of like, what are the desires and what are the patterns of desire? I think those desires are strong. They're clearly moving in a direction that is towards openness, towards engagement, towards collaboration. But there's still this undercurrent of fear that students especially will share with me when they're wondering whether their advisors will be supportive. Faculty members feel like tenure policies are kind of immovable. And I think overall, there's still a sense that people feel collectively almost held hostage to these structures that are nonetheless created by people. And so there's this odd tension where usually, I think cultural change is the most difficult shift in reform, but it's feeling to me like a lot of the cultural change has actually happened. And in fact, it's the structures that really need to catch up. It's not the case everywhere. I think there are really powerful counterexamples. The University of Iowa comes to mind. I was recently at Washington University in St. Louis, and they are also developing some really interesting ideas for cross-disciplinary cohorts among their grad students and some other interesting structural changes. CUNY and I think some of the other public institutions around the country have been doing transformational work around labor and open educational resources and digital and social engagement. So the work is definitely happening, but it continues to feel odd to me that there's this tension between what we think of as the slow-moving work of cultural change, which in this case, I think is actually ahead of the structures and policies that sometimes guide us. So I'm curious to understand more from the folks here why that is and what some of the ways are that we can start to get our systems to catch up with where our hearts and minds and desires are collectively.
Thank you. I'd like to open that up a little more broadly. Katherine.
I'm so happy to hear this from Katina's larger view that it's not cultural change, because I think people are willing to do cultural change. And one thing that I've seen through all of these infrastructures and capacity building with all the projects that we're doing is faculty who sit on the committees that make these decisions don't necessarily have the time to sit and really contemplate them and roll them down to students and implement these kinds of changes. So one thing that I've seen that's really valuable to faculty is having an unstructured moment of small groups and not committees, because committees are group work, they're not teamwork. And I hear a lot of faculty say, this is the way we've always done it. And so then continue on because it's easier to do it that way. So having structures in place where they have that serendipitous moment of talking to each other has been really important. And we are also unique, I think, in the Cal State system in that we have lecturers, we don't call them adjuncts, and they have 3-year contracts and they are welcome to come to these committee meetings. We think about equity when we do committee and small group work and make sure that we pay everybody for it so they feel valued. And that pay might be just $250 in professional development work. But I think the underlying aspect of making this kind of change is really at that micro level in order to see macro changes. And then uplifting the people who are making the changes in some way. I skipped out of the end of a meeting where we were talking about the grant initiatives and these premier public programming things that I run every year with a bunch of faculty. And we were giving them awards for community engagement, interdisciplinarity, and we have so many stellar projects this past year that we actually expanded to add 3 more awards over and above, and everybody gets $1,000. The dean, while we're sitting there, is texting her analyst and like, can you find us 3K? And the thing is, we're in a huge budget shortfall. So next year we won't have these awards. So we want to spend the money before the university yanks it back. And so doing those small kinds of things, and the fact that I'm still a faculty member, I'm not an official administrator. I just get my teaching time bought out, but I'm in the room when the dean and the 2 associate deans make decisions. So I can be that faculty representative. And because I'm a full professor, I'm using it. I'm doing what Kathleen Fitzpatrick taught us, do the risky thing, but always have backup. And so I have the full structure in my brain, and I would love to talk to everybody else about where your structures can have those micro changes that may not necessarily be visible to everybody.
Lasana or Rachel, would you like to add anything into this conversation?
Sure, I'm happy to. One of the things that I'm attempting to do with my work is to articulate a new way to engage publics. And what I do in my work is I have within the arts, I have a series of creative projects that I've designed that situate them as creative scholarship in forms of public pedagogy. And these works, what they do is they locate, apprehend, and attempt to reinscribe memory. I think one of the functions of art, I write about it in my research, and I use and situate art actually as an acronym, ART, a revolutionary tool. And I do a lot of work with these particular projects. I'm attempting to situate the arts as a healing modality, that is healing community. And one of the ways in our culture that we heal is through the practice of what we call nomo. And nomo refers to the creative and the generative power of the spoken word. And it is the word that can go into the culture, and just as blood will cleanse the body and give nourishment to the limbs and the cells and the organs, that is the function of public memory or cultural memory with the word, is to give life to the community and to bring the community back. So over the past almost, I'd say maybe 10 or more years, I've cultivated these presentations that center on spoken word, poetry, and live music, but they also involve visual and performing arts. And I use these projects and I center them in the legacies, the artistic legacy, the intellectual genealogy of different giants, if you will, in our culture and our history, such as Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Wes Montgomery, the late great musician. And my latest one is centering on the art, the legacy, and the activism of Paul Robeson, the great forerunner. It's called Paul Robeson, Man of the People. And what I'm attempting to do with this particular show, it involves 10 musicians, 6-piece jazz orchestra plus 4 strings, 2 vocalists, and I wrote the libretto and co-wrote the score. And it is a project that received some really generous grant funding from our Presidential Arts and Humanities Fellowship. It'll be debuting on May 31st. And so I'm trying to situate this work as a form of public pedagogy and a way to interrogate Mr. Robeson's life, his activism, his history, and then to use those as sort of flashpoints, if you will, to encourage deeper reflection on the arts. So I'm a real adherent and a real believer in the power of the arts to invoke change and to invoke conversation. I'll close with this, these particular creative projects that I do, there's I think 12 in my stable. I'm working on a new one for next year that will interrogate in the same way that I did Paul Robeson for Black women, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Nina Simone, and the great writer Georgia Douglas Johnson. So I'm attempting to use these and situate these pieces of creative scholarship as public pedagogy, but also a way to create conversations, a way to engage difficult subject matter, a way also to challenge the university. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, but challenge the university to sort of interrogate itself, and then how we talk about translational work and how we talk about repurposing, if you will, the modern university. So I'm this is the work that I do. This is work that I will continue to do, and I continue to tie it. Not just, I don't call what I do entertainment, but I call these presentations, and I attempt to tie it to the other areas that I inhabit. That is education, in social studies, and of course the world of Africana history and culture. So that's just a small little preview of what I'm doing in my little corner of the world.
Thanks so much. Rachel, did you want to comment on this one? Or
Yeah, I think the topic of, how does change happen and who is it coming from is really interesting. A lot of the work I do is really at the university level, at our university, of trying to kind of move us forward and rethink, how we're doing things and change perceptions. And I definitely do see a lot of faculty that are very eager for having their work recognized, in ways that haven't been recognized before, who are doing interdisciplinary research, community-based research, who are working on things that may not be rewarded with a large grant, right, or sponsored research, but which change lives. And one thing that struck me about what Katherine was saying is how important it is to have the administrative, recognition, even if it's not coming with a large, sum of money attached or anything, but just saying, these are our values and this matters, is huge for faculty in terms of, the validation of what I'm doing matters, not just to me, not just to the people I'm affecting, but also to my university, that they support me and they want to encourage this kind of work. I think that messaging, I hear it over and over again, especially from people who are on the tenure track but don't yet have tenure, of how do I know that stepping outside this, from the traditional mold of trying to publish in the most high impact journals and get the most citation counts possible is going to get me tenure, right? And so the more we have these kinds of awards, the more we celebrate the kind of scholarship that Lasana is doing, the more it also sends a message from the top down, right? That we are trying to be different. We're trying to do something different. And I think it takes both administration top down and faculty support from the bottom up to collectively change an organization, and then lots of organizations, deciding together that yes, this change is possible. But maybe I'm eternally optimistic on that point.
Well, no, I mean, Kathy, you talked, I think part of your work has been trying to ensure that everyone can flourish, right? And it involved this changing of the RPT process, this 3-year project you were involved in. And Rachel, I know you've been working on similar things. I wonder if you can both talk a little bit about that process of consensus building, sort of what you were just talking about, like how do you, for others who are interested in trying to do this kind of thing, like how do you engage in getting people on board in order to make change?
I can jump into this one, and then Rachel, I'd love to hear from the larger administrative perspective. As a faculty member in the CSU system, we're unionized, and this is why I've stayed for 19 years, because I've felt safe here in some ways. The other thing is that we have an incredible academic senate at San Jose State University that is rivaled by none of the other academic senates in the 23 campus system. And they really believe in acknowledging and changing our RTP system. And it took them about 15 years to do it. And I just dropped into the chat our new-ish. It was approved in 2015, but we were playing with the other system for 5 years. And so when I came to be the college RTP chair, that's the only policy that we were using. And the new policy acknowledges all these different kinds of ways to produce scholarship, research, and creative activity. And all of us that are in social sciences, College of Humanities and Arts, education, health and human sciences, we were all on board with doing this. Scholarship of engagement allows faculty to articulate the value of what they're doing as they do community outreach and community engagement. And since we're an urban university that's in the literal middle of Silicon Valley, which has massive amounts of inequity, both in terms of diversity and economics, as well as access to education, it's really important that we embrace this, as well as giving faculty the ability to count as research their work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging out in the community too. But just because we did the policy doesn't mean it gets enacted. So my job as the chair of College RTP, and because I had a rough road in terms of tenure with my specific department, which is all resolved, whatever, it's all fine. What we all wanted to do when we got to the college RTP with 8 other faculty was we never wanted anybody to suffer what we suffered from. We wanted to be mentoring and capacious in our reviews, and we wrote up reviews that were 3,000 words for each candidate, and there were 25 candidates each of the years that we got it, and we had 4 weeks to do it. So we figured out a way that, and we did line edits, and we used Google Docs so that we could all articulate to each other what is it we're trying to say to this candidate, and how can we recommend to them how to write about their scholarship of engagement, because nobody had helped them do that. So now in the 3rd year that I was college RTP chair, we saw the change being made. And because it's a confidential committee, you can't go as a committee member to a candidate and say, this is how you want to write about it, and this is what we thought. So we had to do it internally in that 3,000 word letter, which the committee members at first were like, Harris, what are you doing? But this is the beauty of me still being a faculty member, and my director role is that I can have that kind of impact, both as the director and mentoring faculty and candidates to input the materials into their dossiers in a particular way, citing and quoting. But then they also can articulate the value of what they're doing to their departments and then to the college. It's at the university level where they're still not obeying it. It's where we get our sciences and applied sciences looking at it and saying, but scholarship of engagement, you didn't get a grant. You submitted 3 NEH grants and you didn't get them. Specifically, they are allowed to put them in and get counted as the work that they've done, because we all know writing an NEH grant or any other grant is like an article. So it's me constantly reiterating that to every community that I go into, and then everybody else has the belief to follow it. But now we have the strategies to be able to implement all of the change. And this is the first year in 5 years I haven't been on the college RTP. So I'm really super interested to see how everybody feels and if they feel heard. There is a weekly faculty happy hour where I do a lot of my work. And so I hear back from them about what works and what doesn't work. So it wasn't me making that change of the RTP policy. It was really our academic Senate, but implementing it in different strategies in different ways takes a lot of conversation behind the scenes, stepping up to be the chair, the co-chair of a committee, making people in the 3-hour meeting do line edits and say, but you said you're just summarizing here. Can you give us an evaluative statement about what's happening here? Or you've just tallied up the number of publications, but what's the value of the publications? And in that way, I think that candidates get heard. We also demonstrate to the president and provost the world-class faculty we have internally at SJSU, because we tend to not talk to each other. We will invite guests coming to our campus who do the same thing, and instead of relying on our world-class faculty. So I'm a Cal State alum, so I truly believe in it. I'm also a CUNY Grad Center alum, where they taught me all of this and how to have a voice, but now I kind of know how to have a voice and be effective about it. I'm not so screechy anymore. I think that's part of it.
Sometimes you got to start by being screechy. Rachel, what about you? Do you have any insight to share on this?
Yeah, so I think our end result is pretty similar to San Jose State, but how we got there is a bit different. I think in our case, American University is very applied social science focused. We are in DC. We care a lot about policy, public policy. Not exclusively, but so a lot of our work has tended to not necessarily fit into traditional scholarship models to begin with, which doesn't mean that we don't collectively have these more traditional ideas. But we are also a very values-based institution. We founded the first research center for anti-racism in the country. And around 2018, we were looking at how to better retain underrepresented minorities and ensure that they could succeed on the tenure track, because a lot of them were leaving. And this turned into a task force that recommended revisions to our tenure guidelines, among other things. And we are just in the process of finalizing. But in our case, instead of it being a university-wide thing, each school and department was tasked with revising their own guidelines. Because what impact looks like is so different from school to school and department to department. After they wrote it, it went to that university level review similar to Katherine's, and then also to the provost's office for comment, feedback, revision. So we are I think there's maybe 3 units that are working on their last revisions. But where we are right now is recognizing that just having that process is not enough. That you can have people writing a document and still not understand what that means in terms of evaluating a candidate in an equitable way. So one of the things that we are doing is using the Boyer model as talking points. We're planning essentially to meet with a bunch of stakeholders, especially people who evaluate faculty on our campus, and also people who are going up for promotion, tenure, reappointment, to say, hey, this is what the Boyer model is. This is how it helps provide a framework for describing impact that goes beyond the traditional scholarship. And this is how your work fits into it, or this is how your work can be measured by it and evaluated. So that's kind of where we are in the process. Is we've started to build some consensus. We have buy-in from administrators, we have buy-in from some faculty, but now it's really standardizing across our campus, so that, and I think for us, what we've targeted as where we see the most problems that need to be addressed are actually the departmental review. Where sometimes the loudest voices can be the ones that are saying, but that's not tenure. So really educating, and like Katherine was saying, asking those questions right? Of not outright attacking, but just saying, take a look at this Boyer model, take a look at their work. How, can you see how we can make that the case in a different way? It's not what you have done, and that's fine. You can continue to do what you've done, but is there a way that we can find a different model, right, to make a different kind of tenure impact? So for us, this is very much an ongoing work. The big thing that we still need to do is do a review of all the revised guidelines to see exactly where we are. And I think we'll probably come up with some best practices that will also be a part of that conversation moving forward. But we recognize it's not a one size fits all conversation. And there are going to be some departments that take this and run. And there'll be other departments that, it'll be an educational process. But I think another easy thing to do is to look at the people that they're hiring and say, how can we make sure these people are supported in the scholarship that they're already doing, right? If you see the value in their work, you want to make sure that it's reflected in their guidelines by the time they're going up for a file.
Absolutely. Katherine, really quickly, and then I have a question that sort of comes on after this one.
Yes, and this is for everybody, because one of the things, thank you, Rachel, I just looked up the Boyer model. I'm wondering for all of y'all, and Lasana, I think especially, if you're seeing the ability to help people move what they're calling as service to instead research, like scholarship of engagement and things like that, moves service work into that research field. So if you've been able to do that and help people reframe for everybody, and I think Lasana, especially because the work you do is research, creative activity, but then is also a lot of times qualified as service.
Yeah, very interesting. The university where I am, formerly known as IUPUI, as of July 1, it will be known as IU Indy or IU Indianapolis. It's split from Purdue University. But one of the things that I was involved with is rewriting of T&P policies. And what we did was included what we call a DEI balanced integrative case. And what that was a very elaborate and exotic definition and description that we came up with, and it had to go through a formal vote at the campus level, and it became a way to be assessed on your work. One thing that is also true in a lot of places, particularly with Black and Brown faculty, is that Black and Brown faculty, and I'm Exhibit A, we wind up doing a lot of service. I'm doing things in juvenile detention centers, I'm doing things in prisons, I'm doing things in barbershops. And what we get called, we get called by people to be subject matter experts, or people want accessibility to what we know, and because of whatever reason, what we're doing in the community. And we, have this opportunity to be of service to people. And so we go and do it. And historically, the university has not looked at that as often as valuable, or has not looked at that as legit, quote unquote, legit research. So faculty have found themselves in the unfortunate position of having to justify their geography and to play really defense offense in terms of trying to justify a field or a set of practices that you occupy. And so it's been really unfortunate, but I think this balanced DEI integrative case has really helped people reimagine the work that they do. It has helped, I think, folks, even if they had their jaws tight around it, it helped to have the conversation around diversifying how we think about the work that people do and how people show up to do the work that they do. So it's been a really healthy thing. I don't know if it will survive past this year, because we have a very, racism is extremely productive and it's extremely active. And so we have a lot of really hardcore conservatives in this. I'm not from here, I'm from Chicago. So I don't claim any of this Indiana madness, but we have a lot of conservatives in this state who, they just passed a Senate Enrolled Act 202. And I'm hearing a lot of stuff, a lot of grumblings around the coming fall legislative session. So they're not done, tip of the iceberg, that kind of thing. And it's all happening, of course, in concert with November and some things that are looking to happen. So it's going to be, it's looking like potentially to be a Category 7 storm. And what people have to do, I come from the Black tradition of struggle and of organizing and strategizing. So it's not to be alarmist, but it is to say that we really have to batten down the hatches, and we really have to be that much more mindful and depthful about our thinking, about our conversations, about our work, because there's a lot at stake here, not just individual careers, but democracy and who we are as human beings, quality of our interpersonal engagements, and just so much more at stake. So we all have skin in that game.
Our colleague Carrie, who couldn't be with us today, she wrote and said, the questions that you're asking, that we're all asking ourselves, are the questions of the moment, right? Especially for those of us that are committed to the academy and academic leadership in its sometimes beauty, sometimes ugly mess, right? But in doing this work, and what you're talking about there, Lasana, is sort of the idea of opening up an otherwise, and a way for things to be different. And there's something, Lasana, that you wrote to us where you were talking about how you envisioned a future academy as one in which full participation is a constituent value. So where individuals, whatever their identity and background or institutional position, can thrive, engage, and contribute to the flourishing of others. And I feel like that is a thread that I'm sort of feeling across this panel. I was going to ask about what the barriers are to it currently, but that some of the barriers are way beyond academia and very real. But I would love to know, like, what will it take for us to get there, to this sort of academy of full participation where everyone flourishes? I don't know, Katina, if you want to take that one first, or if Lasana, you do.
Well, Lasana, you can jump in first. I had my time starting a question off, chime in after.
Okay, well, that was very thoughtful. I'll be quick. I think it'll take, number one, a radical reimagining of our institutions, their purposes, their functions. And by institutions, I don't just mean academic institutions. I mean the church, I mean the community center, I mean the school. And I think we're going to have to prick our imaginations and challenge ourselves and dare greatness. The other thing I think it's going to take is and all of these in my mind can happen in tandem. We can walk and chew this gum as human beings. A creative reinvention of how we show up in those institutions. I have a lot of colleagues. I've had colleagues actually tell me that, like, they were like, you go and work in those communities? I'm like, yeah. And they were shocked that I actually go. And what I do, and this is what I would do wherever I happen to land in academia, I go into the most high need communities. And I usually, I locate the zip codes that have the most high need. Well, what I've learned over the years is that these high need communities, simultaneously, that is also where the most promise is. That's where the most excellent and the most wonderful things are happening. And so much creative and community wealth resides in those communities. I love working in the prisons. There's genius in the jails, and I love working in the highway and in the byway with folks. Thirdly, I think it's going to take a kind of what I call a revolutionary reinscribing of values. And I'm talking about the values that represent the best of who we are collectively and personally, and in the best of what we ought to become. I'm reminded of Dr. Frantz Fanon, the Algerian psychoanalyst, his 3 fundamental questions. Who am I? Am I really who I am? Am I all I ought to be? And I'm also reminded in this moment of Marcus Garvey, who said, what humans have done, humans can do. So I think the answers that we seek are within us. And what's the challenge is mustering the will and then reinscribing those values. And one last thing I'll say is I'm very deeply involved in the arts community here. And we have a monthly arts leaders call that I'm a part of. There's around 70 different people log on this call monthly. And these are folks who run ballet companies here. They run art studios, just all manner of things, poets, people who run the stages and the venues in this city. And one of the things that I've floated to the CEO of the Indianapolis Arts Council is that we need to think about strategizing and synergizing and creating a 5-year campaign to raise $500 million. And that $500 million will be the seed money for a total arts infusion, starting at the earliest age, all the way from K to gray, if you will, the earliest age all the way up to the seniors. But definitely, it's got to start with young people, and the products or the outcomes or the events that come out of those initiatives will take the form of things like puppet shows, will take the form of things like community theater, stages on the back of flatbed trucks that show up in communities and different parkings, you know what I mean? So we need to begin to get children, especially, introduced and comfortable with difference at a very early age. That is not to be something seen as a pejorative. It is not to be feared. It is not to be militated against or seen as hostile, but it is something that represents this patchwork, this mosaic, this of who we are, how we show up as humanity. And I think doing that with the youngest children at the youngest age, I think will give us an extreme benefit as we forge ahead as a society.
I love that so much. I feel like in talking about higher ed, I hardly ever hear people talk about kids, and we have to, we have to talk about K-12 education in this country alongside everything that we're talking about for universities. And I think the arguments around what we even mean by the public good and how much a sense of public responsibility and public support has eroded in, the recent decades. That starts with kids too. Nicky, thinking about your question, I think I'm in a funny position, right? Because I have a lot of opinions about institutions, but I'm not in one. And so, and there's reasons why I left also. As much as I loved being at CUNY, I was also really, really burnt out by the time I stepped away, and kind of disillusioned with some of the things that I was coming up against, which I'm sure others can relate to as well. But I also have been thinking a lot about, so I left CUNY in 2021. So everything that was happening with COVID was still very strongly present in that moment. And as difficult as that was, which was very, very difficult, for everybody in different ways, and it was felt very strongly in New York City. That was also the most noticeable moment when I saw people supporting each other. I saw so many instances of mutual aid type support, material, intellectual, social, that I had just, not seen in the same way. Not that it wasn't there, but I think it rose to the surface out of necessity. And because we were all kind of engaging with the world in a different way than we maybe typically had been. And that really left me thinking, like, how can institutions get out of the way of these undercurrents that want to happen naturally? Like, people want to help each other. I think they do, right? And yet our disciplines and our committees and this scarcity mindset has this strongly diminishing influence on that kind of energy and work. People who I've talked to recently know that I've also been very obsessed with mushrooms in the last couple of years. And this is the other thing that I think about a lot is, like, what are the ways in which we can ensure mutual thriving in a way that's non-competitive? Something that has been super interesting to me about mushrooms is the ways that two different types. Sorry to go down a rabbit hole. One, which are the decomposers that take, this fallen log and return the nutrients to the soil, make something from, essentially nothing or something from waste. They remediate the soil when there's biotoxins present. The other, which are these mycorrhizal mushrooms, which form really complex and consistent partnerships with completely different species to transfer nutrients. You'll only find certain mushrooms growing with certain trees. And both of those two ideas have led me to thinking a lot more about what are the conditions in which we might encourage that kind of mutual thriving? What are the ways that two unlike groups of people or two unlike projects might come together, not forever, maybe just for a time, come together, support one another, and then move away again or fade. The other side of this is that it has me thinking about the university as it currently exists as the rotting log and the substrate that will become, the next flush of growth and nourishment. And I really waver between a pretty deep cynicism about many of the decisions over the years that have led universities to the place where they are now, and a really deep hope, on the other hand, that I see emerging largely through individuals and relationships. And so I think, the mycelium of a mushroom is growing invisibly long before you ever see something come through the soil or through the branch of a tree. And so I think finding ways to let those threads continue to grow and flourish, even if we can't see outcomes from them. What are the things that are, I shared this article from Carrie and Natalie Lovelace about attunement in the cracks. What are the things that are growing in the cracks? Maybe we don't need to, call them out to the surface before they're ready, but how can we let them continue to grow until something new can arise?
I'm so excited to read your book, Katina. Just wanted to say that.
I have pictures to share for later too.
Katherine or Rachel, do either of you have anything you want to add to this idea of what are the conditions we need for this kind of inclusive academy in which everyone can thrive?
I mean, I think a lot of great points have already been raised, that collective action and coalition building and kind of finding each other's common ground, is key. Just to kind of have a more grounded example at AU for us, thinking about change in the research context, one of our big barriers has been showing our board of trustees, especially, that this is financially viable. Right? That doing something new and different can still be successful in a different way. And it's, all about finding success in their terms so that they can also join our coalition, right? So for us, we got a couple of grants that, are supporting research translation efforts. So they can say, oh, wow, someone is willing to give us $6 million for that. Now I'm interested, right? So it's just kind of, finding those little hooks, and they might be different hooks for different people, but so that we can all build from there and start to trust each other a bit more and take risks, right? And it can be hard to get started, but once you get the momentum rolling, right, and you are able to give each other a bit of latitude and a bit of grace, that's where I think the you can really snowball, for lack of a better term.
I love all these metaphors coming out too, and where we can translate them into administrative speak, so our presidents and provosts and upper admins can see the assertion of all of these from the micro level and how they relate to the macro level. I'm dropped into the chat, if it'll let me do it, some of the things that we're doing, because I think some of the change is about making visible what's already happening. And that's a lot of my jobs and all of these projects that I'm doing. I'm not necessarily being a thought leader. I'm being somebody who's creating the infrastructure to support, reward, and then institute a sustainable way to do these kinds of things broadly across the university. And one of those things was just finding out who the speechwriter was for the president. and then drafting 3 very, very good paragraphs about what we do in Humanities and Arts College around AI, because we were getting left out of the calls for funding, and millions of dollars are drifting into the CSUs for AI. And the president then read that word for word at a very influential thing with a bunch of stakeholders from the city and also state legislators. And then they all wanted to read our NEH proposals about AI in H&A, and the president read all of them. So it was really finding out who's the person that we can get to the president, because I saw the president on Friday or yesterday, and I got 3 minutes with her. And they were very jovial so that she remembers who I am. It wasn't me putting the NEH grant in front of her and saying something about it because she was at an art show. The other thing is that making sure that people are writing about us at the marketing and promotion level, just about our college and how wonderful it is and how it does a behind the scenes look at student engagement. So it demonstrates what we're doing to our higher ups, that we're doing the high impact practices, we're using digital pedagogy. This is how digital humanities works. This is how we're integrating everything that we're doing with the community and what our students are actually getting from it. So it's those tinier things that are the wraparound of it, but it's also something else that I'd never done before. I went to National Humanities Advocacy Day on Capitol Hill this year and last year. Last year's the dean and I and 3 other people from the CSUs representing the 23 campuses, and we felt under supported. This year we got staffed by our federal liaison, not only from our campus but from the CSUs, and their job was to go into the legislator's office with the 25-year-old staffers and make them at ease so that we could pitch them our ideas, and then he would give us a signal of stop talking, which which was really helpful. But we're also in California, where we were going and talking with much more liberal Democrats, but it got us in their purview for any appropriation bills that are coming up. And now they're coming to San Jose State, which we're now calling ourselves Silicon Valley's public university. They're coming to us to engage with the 65 faculty who work in AI already and have been working in it for 20 years. So my role was just to make visible in a way that was palatable to different constituencies through storytelling. And as a humanist, I'm super good at storytelling. Maybe not brevity in storytelling, but so I'll stop there with that one.
But no, it is such a crucial part. And I think, to circle back to where we started when we were saying, this desire for change, Katina was like, this desire for change is there. And Lasana's been telling us, these people are already doing this amazing work. It's a question of like surfacing that and like doing the work to translate it to whoever has the purse strings, quite honestly, because, there's one thing that humanities and arts folks aren't really great about talking about how great we are. and fields that are a lot more quantitative have a much easier way of quantitatively showing proxies for how great they might be. And so, yeah, this sort of like working at the speed of trust, the surfacing, it's all really, really important. I did want to open up the conversation a little bit in case anyone from our audience has questions for these amazing panelists or comments that they want to make.
There is a question in the chat from Haley Hazlitt from Dora, who had to jump off. But before she left, she asked, I love the idea of challenging existing structures and creating space for compensated, open discussions among faculty with the goal of supporting long-term change. Building off this, are there any strategies that y'all have found effective to support structural change across different departments within an institution or across different institutions? Can you also speak to strategies to assess interdisciplinary work or non-traditional scholarly outputs? I can repost that in the chat if you want to.
Oh, Jason just did, I think.
Oh, perfect.
I think one that I can throw in there, and I swear I'll be quick with this one. I became the person who volunteered to be the chair or director of the Digital Ethnic Studies, the DEF CON grant that we received to build the DH at CSU consortium, and the task of pulling together 23 campuses in order to understand the use of digital ethnic studies very specifically, and then DH written more largely. And it's taken 5 years, 2 years of that funding with a $5,000 capacity building grant from the Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium, which is funded by Mellon. So we did a lot with $5,000 each year. And one of the things that we really look for in terms of being interdisciplinary is that we created a values statement. And last year when we got together in August at CSU Fullerton, I took them through a HuMetrics workshop. And at first, and I'm turning red because it was really impactful and helpful, but I had to push them. So I put them all together and made them talk to different campuses. And so because even though they were there on their own and volunteering, we had 18 campuses, they wanted to clump in their own campuses. And we assigned them seating in a room, and then we gave them the values cards and asked them to organize them about what they want DH at CSU to represent. And they taped them up on a board so they could see each other, and there were about 6 groups. And then they sat down and said, "We're done." And I walked over to everyone like I was in a class, and I said, "Now you have to articulate how those values are connected." And their response was, "But it's going to get messy." And my response, and Jamila Pugh Moore, who is the co-director, also, we said, "That's okay. Start drawing stuff and add your own values." And so what we ended up with was beautiful and messy. And then we had general conversation about how can we put these into a mission statement and a values statement. So we got 45 people to do a HuMetrics workshop, and I am so grateful that y'all put all of those materials online so that we could just download the values cards and use them. And now I'm hearing from some different campuses in the CSU that they're wanting to start a digital or DHE sort of center or institute, which is really difficult in the CSU. The first thing they're doing is a values-based workshop and ask me for all the materials. So they're not saying value statements, meaning we value XYZ. They're actually just finding what's the value, what do we want to do here, and then from there they're building their principles of community. So that's a big thank you. And also we probably have 10 more years worth of work to do. I seem to only take on projects that take 10 years. Got 13 more years before I retire, so we'll get it done.
One thing
oh, go ahead, Katina.
I was just going to say that sometimes there can also be a value in, I'm going to say the word values too many times in the sentence. There can be a good strategy of working within the existing values of a place to try and mitigate fear. So one thing that I've come up against, this was, I'm going to drop a link in the chat for a project that I did with Syracuse University around developing new dissertation standards. And one of the things I tried to do there was not to say, you know, wouldn't it be great if our dissertations valued X, Y, and Z, but instead to say, oh, you want the dissertation to show depth of research. Great. Here are a few different ways that that could look. So rather than, you know, if they weren't ready for the values conversation, there's a lot to be done even within the explicit values that they may already have. So working within those values to try and like reduce resistance and instead like get everybody kind of thinking in the same wavelength, I think can be really helpful. And sometimes using that like in a little bit of a sneaky way, like the question asked in part about how do you encourage change across departments or across institutions? Well, sometimes you can tap into the sense of competitiveness that if they're doing this, then maybe we should be too. And that can be an effective strategy. So yeah, I think both of those things, Kathy's way is probably the more, you know, deeply integral and like thoughtful and slow and meaningful approach. And mine feels a little bit hacky, but sometimes it's useful.
And I think just to speak to the second half of the question about assessing non-traditional forms of research and outputs, There is no one size fits all. And I think what we tried to emphasize in our guidelines is inclusion without, being prescriptive. So a lot of it is kind of make the case, right? Because I'm not going to tell you who your community is. I'm not going to tell you how to measure success, right? As you're working with that community. What I often tell people, and I help a lot of people put together files, is to think about who am I trying to impact? What efforts can I show that I'm trying to impact them? And then what evidence do I have of my success? And it may look like a jumbled mess, but altogether it tells a story. And we aren't always going to have the right measure, right? We don't always know the biggest impacts that we have. But like, just to take an example from my university, someone who wrote a book about domestic violence, and that book is being used to train 911 operators in the state of Colorado. And I know about that because they tweeted about it. It's amazing, right? And it's just something that you just happen to come across. But for every one story you have, there's probably 5 more that you just don't know about. So you collect what you have. And a lot of times it's focusing on the efforts rather than the long-term, especially impacts. And I feel like a lot of non-traditional scholarly outputs tends to fall into that category of once you've written the article, right? That's kind of the like, okay, I'm going to get tenure based on this. But the value is all in all of this other rich work that can be used to tell stories. And if you have metrics to back that up, great. But a lot of it is more of a trust building exercise when it comes to things like interdisciplinary research, where there aren't standards the way there are for more subject-specific disciplinary research indicators. So you just kind of have to make room for people to build their own cases at the end of the day.
Lasana, I know that your work is, in the arts, particularly in this public arts. Like, how have you been able to make that legible at your own institution, or have you had to sort of fight to make your work legible? And just thinking about Haley's question, and like, are there things that you've learned that could help others who are trying this?
Well, I'm an artist and a poet, and that shows up. It's something that I did before my life in the academy, and it'll be something I do, I think, even in death, knock on wood, I'll continue to do it. So I have tried mightily to center history and art and everything that I do. I am at the end of this month, I'm the outgoing the secretary of the faculty. We have a thing called Policy Council. I was the chair of Policy Council. I'll be ending my 3rd year. One of the duties is to facilitate our monthly faculty meetings. So for the last 3 years, I close our monthly faculty meetings with a poem. And I have introduced poets from Vietnam, poets from India, poets from all over the world. And I didn't know how it was going to be received at first, but then there was one month I forgot to do the poem, and I was scolded by some of my colleagues. They were like, "Where's the poem?" So I love that because and people have told me individually that they love that as well. It's something that they're not used to, and it's something that it has become a very necessary part of what would otherwise be a sort of a dry, sort of a, kind of maudlin kind of occasion. So that's just a small little thing, but also in larger ways, I have become, as of last year, a fellow with our Arts and Humanities Institute. So actually where I am right now, I'm not in my office, I'm in the library, because this Friday, today marks the end of our 3-week summer research academy. This was our first week, and then we're working next week. And so everyone has a project, but what this does is it brings colleagues from different units. There are people from the Heron School of Art, there are people from education, there's people from School of Liberal Arts, there's one person from medicine. So these are people who are, again, sort of collaborating and coming together around the power of the arts. I've been able to translate the work that I've done and parlay it into grants and different interventions in schools involving literacy and cultural history. I was a recipient of a really generous grant from the Allen Whitehill Clues Foundation. It was a 2-year project, $80,000 grant. I'd created a curriculum called Elevate. It's an exploration of 20th century global Black arts movements. So for 2 years, I worked with at least 6 different classes of 5th graders and introduced them to the poetry, the song, the dance during the Indígena movement in Haiti, the Negrismo movement in Cuba and Puerto Rico. They're studying the visual culture of these societies. And this is in a state and really in a region where there's an arts learning gap. And so what happens usually is when you do things like that, you show up at the school and you see just this elation come over the children. It's time to go. It's the end of our 80-minute period, but they don't want to leave. So that again is just the power of the arts to sort of bring people together, to ignite the imagination, to make children curious, and to encourage reflection. And it is just so important that we do that. So my colleagues over here in the Arts and Humanities Institute, we have been very, very deliberate, particularly around our new vice president for research development, who I was on his hiring committee or his search committee. I was so glad. And when we were interviewing him during his Zoom interview, I leaned over to the VP for research, who I really had just met. And I said, he's the one. This guy has a victorious consciousness. And he was the only candidate that, well, he comes from medicine and, he has a science background, but he understands large figure, 7, 8-figure research grants. He understands R&D, he understands all that, but he also had a space in his talk and in his consideration for what the Academy could be for the arts and humanities and for urban education. And he positioned those things in his talk. And so that made him stand far afield of those other candidates. We just came from lunch a little while ago. I'll close with this. I told some colleagues as we were walking back, one of the colleagues was bemoaning how the humanities has just, gotten short shrift and is under attack. And it's just, why would you major in English or philosophy or anything? And I told him that to push back against that, I said, when you teach theater and you do not teach the humanities, that's how you get Batman villains. And when you teach STEM and you do not teach the humanities, that's how you get Spider-Man villains. So the humanities are essential and we have to continue doing it. And it means we're going to have to challenge ourselves to become more creative, because the challenges, and Nicky, you mentioned barriers, they're going to continue to be there. Despite that, we're going to have to knuckle down and become even more creative, more innovative. And lastly, I tell my students this, so forgive the pop culture reference. If we haven't learned anything else from The Walking Dead, we should have learned that you need people. You can't do things without people.
You're here. And,
Yeah. Sorry.
This whole conversation has been sort of circulating around people and collaboration and community and understories and mushrooms. And I think it's really beautiful. I do want to make sure that I give people a little bit of a time for a break before we move into the next session at 3:30. We're going to have a panel that's focusing on this phenomenal Breaking the Mold program, which is a professional development initiative designed to create a pipeline to senior leadership in higher education for faculty members of color and women in the arts and humanities. And, one of our HuMetrics co-PIs is also a co-PI on this project, and it has been really amazing to see the sort of values in action work that Breaking the Mold has done. That's going to be at 3:30. And so for right now, I would just want to thank all of you for being here. I feel like we could have had this conversation all day. There's so much more I want to ask all of you. So just really huge thanks and gratitude for being here.